Welcome. Welcome to another Seize the Day. Trust you guys are waking up, feeling refreshed, ready to begin a new day. Today is Thursday, March 2nd, and we're off to a brand new day. So I'm excited about today's topic. It gives us an opportunity to look through the scriptures and learn some things as we also engage in this whole methodology of trying to find the big idea behind these passages. We've been looking at a passage now during this Lenten season in Matthew 19, verses 1 through 15. And the question that has been raised by the Pharisees to Jesus was, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? And it seems like a bizarre kind of question just to lead out with. And part of the issue was, as you read in like verse 3, the Pharisees, some of the Pharisees have come to test Jesus, right? To put him on the spot, really to present him in a very bad light. So the question is really not about the question. Have you ever had that in your own personal experiences where people will come and they ask you something, but it's really not the question that they really want to ask? It's really a setup question. It's really to just put you in a position, that might be a little defensive. Well, the question that's posed for Jesus that we have been looking at this week is all about placing Jesus within a controversy that was existing between two of the notable rabbis in the days in which Jesus ministered, Rabbi Hillel and Shammai, that took different positions on a passage that's found in Deuteronomy chapter 24, where it says that a man was permitted to divorce his wife for anything indecent. And Rabbi Hillel took the position about anything being more liberal, to the point where even in the Mishnah, a commentary on the Old Testament, it was quoted as a grounds for divorce was if a wife burned her husband's food. So that's pretty ridiculous. But Shammai put the emphasis on things that were indecent. And so it began to really divide people. And I believe that this is what's happening here in the way the question is posed to Jesus. It's a way to put him in a bad light, before the people for whom Jesus is gaining greater and greater notoriety, right? But it's also, as we saw, it was a passage that also brought to the forefront this whole idea of Jesus. And I put this up for you guys to look at. This was a slide where we saw Jesus is coming down the Jordan on his way all the way up north in that salmon-colored region, right at the top of the Sea of Galilee, and he's making his way all the way down south to Jerusalem. But on the journey, you see, not far from where Jerusalem is, John the Baptist had been imprisoned and beheaded because he confronted Herod Antipas about his relationship to his brother's wife. He had taken his brother's wife as his own. He had divorced his own wife and now had taken, Philip's wife as his own. And that resulted in not only in John's imprisonment, but eventually it would lead to circumstances where he was beheaded. He was murdered for this particular stance. So what I try to show by this map is like there's history behind this question, right? So it's not just about the question about marriage or divorce. It is a question that they are using to set Jesus up. All of which to say that I don't believe that this text is Jesus giving us an exhaustive account on marriage and divorce. But what he does do is he answers the question based on God's word and God's design. And so many places throughout the scriptures we see Jesus doing that. Yesterday, we took a look at Matthew chapter 5, And in that passage, we saw how Jesus said, look, you have heard that it was said. And then he refers to Old Testament passages, right? And then he says, but I say unto you. And what Jesus was doing is giving them a fuller understanding of what these commandments were all about. So, for instance, when he talked about thou shalt not murder, quoting one of the 10 commandments found in Exodus chapter 20, Jesus goes on to say, I tell you that if a man is angry with his brother, he has killed him. So all of a sudden, this commandment, from the viewpoint of Jesus, is something a lot deeper than just whether or not I physically took the life of someone. And it makes sense, right? Because think about your own life. How many times have people said things to you, man, that they just go down deep? And it takes a long time for you to be able to extricate yourself from that kind of criticism or, verbal, insults. It's in a nanosecond, you can recall in your mind, right? Some negative things, harsh things that people may have said to you. They don't have a shelf life. They could live a very long time. And if we're not careful, they become a root of bitterness that just springs up in one's life. And you could go about adding years and years and years to your life, but never really getting away from the hurt of those comments. And that's a way that we have to constantly, humble ourselves before God. We have to find ways to forgive. I mean, hey, just recently I had a circumstance where I felt someone wrongfully accused me, and my internal reaction, I'm telling you, I just didn't think it was fair, and I had to remind myself again of these passages, saying, okay, the anger of man doesn't accomplish the wisdom of God. So what are the steps that I need to do when I feel my brother has sinned against me? And it says that I had to go to him in private. I can't go blasting it around to everybody. I need to go to him directly. And I got to try this a number of times because the idea is to win my brother over. And so, I'm not preaching to you something I'm not also having to put into practice. So for you and me, this idea then that I am to put on this mind of Jesus, I'm to look at this word now as Jesus is beginning to unfold it for me. It's because that's where I'm going to find this sense of freedom, of truth. Because if I leave it to myself, it's going down a wrong way. I need the wisdom of God in my life so that I can properly order my steps. That's what Jesus said in Matthew 5, not only when it came to thou shalt not murder, but also that thou shalt not, commit adultery. And what is he demonstrated that adultery wasn't just so much the physical act, but it was the lustful intention of the heart. And so all of a sudden, we went from being able to check a box that says, oh, I've never committed adultery, to now God saying, no, I look at the intentions of a man's heart. All of which to demonstrate, man, we have gone so far away from God's original design, right? We have moved so far away from what God had created to be perfect, which is why we need a Savior, which is why we need Jesus, one who comes and pays the penalty for our sin. And that's what this whole Gospel of Matthew is about. It's showing not only the role that Jesus is playing, but why he has to do what he's doing, which is why he's been telling his disciples now in the most recent texts that he has to go to Jerusalem where he would be killed and resurrected. So Jesus then gave us this picture, right, of what he said was God's original design. This is the way in which Jesus responded to their question about, hey, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? And then Jesus answered them by putting this before them. And this was all about, these four aspects of God's marriage covenant. He quotes Genesis 1:27 when he says that the Creator created them male and female. So in the mind of God, there was always this pairing of male and female. I recently came across an article that said a baby's DNA, its gender is determined at the moment of conception. When that sperm and that egg come together and create this life, in that moment, it's already embedded with either an XX chromosome or an XY chromosome. It's either going to be male or it's going to be female. And that was God's design from the beginning. Now, I know we live in a different age right now, but this is exactly an illustration of Jesus saying, look, I need to put on this mind of God. And God is telling me, through his revelation, this was his intent with creation from the beginning. And then he goes on to describe this marital covenant, where he says, for this cause a man shall leave his father and mother, right? Cleave unto his wife, be united with her. And he says, and the two shall become one. And what God has joined together, let no man separate. So this idea of a covenant then that God was establishing with Adam and Eve that would live on in perpetuity was to leave, right? Establishing this institution of marriage is what's being stressed, since Adam and Eve, they didn't have earthly parents. Who are they leaving? So it was always about what was going to come after. And so this new authority is established. You know, my boys, they just got remarried. They're starting their lives together with their families. And my wife and I, we need to respect that. You know, in-laws need to respect that. This is their home. This is their, they are establishing. Doesn't mean that we can't speak into their life. Doesn't mean that you all of a sudden stop being a parent. But it does mean that they have the responsibility now to establish their home together. And so part of that establishing of that home is being united. They are to pursue this unity together. And it's kind of hard to do when people haven't made that decision, right? Where they haven't really come together. The word there, to be united, is a Hebrew word that means to be glued. It literally stuck together. And this is a process, right? And especially since sin has entered into the world and relationships are that much more difficult to maintain that sense of harmony. But this is the covenant. God's saying, when I leave when I leave father and mother to cleave to my wife, this is a decision that is made on both of our parts. We are establishing this union together. And the goal is to become one. That's the ultimate goal. And God says, what I join together, let no man, separate. So there was this permanence of marriage. All of this then to fulfill the commands that he had given to Adam and Eve to rule over the world, right? To subdue the earth, to be fruitful and multiply. This gives a sense of purpose. It gave permanence. It gave pleasure. All of this was God's ultimate design. They want to talk about reasons, right? They want to separate. And Jesus responds saying, yeah, that's not the way it was meant to be. It was always intended for you to be one. The goal was to become one. And now look where we are in a world that is so contentious, and it's not an unusual thing, right, for us to see divorce and its consequences all around us. I shared with you, right? My mom and dad, they were divorced. I was part of the ours because my mom had 3, my dad had 3, and then they married and had me and a younger brother named Kenny. So I've seen that. We live in a broken world. This is the world in which we are living. So when Jesus comes back to them and says, you guys want to talk about the reasons for divorce, I'd like to remind you again that God is calling us to live by a higher standard. It's not just so that I can, feel good about checking off some boxes. No. This is about fulfilling God's will and God's intention. Because remember the Lord's Prayer? Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Well, here is Jesus telling us what God's will was for the establishment of this marriage covenant. And you guys are busy trying to nitpick all the reasons when really we should be giving ourselves to finding reasons to fulfill this covenant, coming alongside couples, counseling and helping and providing, wisdom. And I get it. Some people, they're not going to be interested. They're going to just walk their own way. But it doesn't mean that we have to negate the word of God because of a culture that has determined to turn its back on Jesus. It's quite the contrary. You and I are the light of the world. We're the salt of the earth. So is it any wonder then, here's this text now in Matthew 19:7, when the Pharisees, they respond to Jesus' statement about this ideal, and they say, why then did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? See, now they want to act like the biblical scholars. Jesus took them back to Genesis and showed them what God's design was. You see any pause in their spirit? You see any reflection on their part? Is there any self-awareness that here they're talking to Jesus and he responds to them with God's ultimate design for why he created them, male and female, and how far away we have come from that? And that's not just in our present day. This is in every generation, right? So this isn't about apportioning blame. This is just looking at the way the world is right now. It's in rebellion against the ways of God. But Jesus is here to remind us again, to pull us back. Because he says the kingdom of heaven is going to be those who hear this word of mine and put it into practice. But their response is, okay, hey, Moses commanded that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away. It's interesting. They look at what Moses said in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1, as a command. I want you to see how Jesus then responds. Because in verse 8, what does Jesus say? Jesus replied, Moses permitted. Notice that. Let me go back. The Pharisees want to say Moses commanded. Jesus is saying, no, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives. And why was that? Well, he gives you the answer. Because your hearts were hard. But it was not that way from the beginning. See, this is why I'm saying, how open are we to really opening that door to a new way of thinking? It's not about my rights. It's not about me divorcing this woman. It's not about coming up with reasons that are palatable for me or for a culture in which I live in. No, God is calling me to a higher standard. That's why this whole idea of forgiving, showing grace to people who don't necessarily deserve it. We don't deserve it. Jesus giving us that story, right, about a servant who was forgiven so much debt that he could never repay, only to turn around and hold a fellow, Israelite, and throwing him in prison for a couple of bucks. And the master saying, wait a minute, I just forgave you all of this debt, and you couldn't show that same sense of grace to someone that owed you a few bucks? Can you imagine now how you're going to feel standing before Jesus when he says, I died on a cross for you so that you might gain entrance into this kingdom because your sins are forgiven, and you can't forgive your brother? And even if he doesn't, if he's not receptive, that's on him. That's not on you. As far as it depends upon you, we're to try to be at peace with all men. That's why he tells you, listen, if he sins against you, then you should go to him privately. And if he doesn't listen, go with 2 or 3 witnesses. If he doesn't listen to them, enlist the help of the community around to try to restore these relationships. It's always about putting on God's mind. It's always about trying to do the right thing. It's thinking differently in this world. Why? Because we have received this revelation from Jesus. So we have a completely different set of marching orders. So Jesus says, listen, you guys think this was a command, and now you're looking for reasons. What you should be doing is trying to fulfill the ultimate goal of what God was, because that goal was meant to bring harmony, unity, oneness. Who doesn't need more of that? You know, there are some days, I've been married now, this May I'll be married 41 years. That's a long time. And there have been times when I'm sure my wife wanted to kill me. Just plain and simple. Sometimes in my bullheadedness, maybe I'm just charging out too quickly, but I know that there are other times that we have both expressed to each other that we never would have wanted to go through this life without the other. You know, Cindy's had some health concerns of late that have required us to go and get some professional opinions here. And it concerns us. And those kind of conversations are meant for us to sit down and just talk about why we value one another so much. That these health scares are just a reminder again of our own mortality. It's just a reminder again that this life is fleeting. And while neither one of us are looking forward to that kind of departure, but unless Jesus comes back, we're all on this journey, right? This life, there's just so much sand in one's hourglass. And I try to be, and my wife and I both, we try to be very candid about these things. Not that it's going to mean that we grieve any less. It's just like when I lost my son, I don't fall apart, because I actually believe with all my heart that my son right now is enjoying the best life ever. Why would I wish him back? Why would I do that? He's in a place now where there is no more anxiety, no more pain, no more death, no more sorrow, no more sickness. He's in the presence of Jesus. Why would I wish him back? Now, does my heart sad? Yeah. If you came to my home, you'd see right behind me, there's pictures on the tables with his face on it. We have one of those little Alexa things that give you all the pictures in your photo albums, and we have all the pictures of Jared that pop up every now and then. And we'll be sitting here at dinner, and all of a sudden this picture comes up, and we're like, can you believe that he's gone? And my wife would say, well, he's not gone, he's just gone ahead. And I'm like, touche, I get it. You see, this is the point. Jesus is saying to them, look, God's ideal is different. Now you guys are looking for ways to skirt around this when you should be really leaning into it. So, having said that, Jesus says it was not that way from the beginning, which is always the idea that he wants us to put on, to open the door to a new way of thinking. So, then Jesus goes on and says, I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, and marries another woman, commits adultery. Wow, that's a hard text, isn't it? That's a hard text. This text now, it's saying what? What is Jesus saying in this text? Because the issue here, remember, the issue here is that the Pharisees are trying to put Jesus in a bad light. So the question that they're raising before him, I hope you guys have been listening. The question was to place Jesus in a compromising position before the people, to perhaps even place him in a bad position before the political powers that be. They want Jesus out of the picture. If John the Baptist was taken out by having his head cut off, then so be it. For the sake of everybody, let's get rid of this Jesus. He's upsetting the cart too much. And you see it in the days in which we're living. Honestly, how many times do you find that Christians are at the brunt of all the jokes? And that's the least of it. Sometimes we're being attacked for the positions that we take. When you read a text like we read here from Genesis 1, they want to take your head off. How narrow-minded could you be? How how ignorant can you get? Like no. My call is to serve the one who gives me life and breath. I am called to serve the one who created all things and to whom one day I will stand before and give an account. That's who I have to be mindful of. I am not going to concern myself about anyone except for the one who is able to pronounce a judgment on me that will affect my eternity. Yeah, my allegiance is to Jesus. And if it puts me at odds with the culture in which I'm in it isn't the first time this has happened. All you have to do is look at the history of man and realize, yeah, they have come to wrong conclusions many, many times. No, Jesus is telling us we ought to be pursuing God's ideal. But what about this exception clause? And that's what I just want to spend just a moment or two here with you. What are we to make of the exception clauses? Well, let me just take you to a couple of things here to just show you that sometimes we have to be careful that we're not making more of these texts than we should. For instance, this text that we just read here, right, in Matthew chapter 9, it says, I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, and marries another woman commits adultery. That's a pretty hard statement, right? But there's this exception. I want you to read, this is the same text. It's a parallel text that's found in Mark chapter 10. And Jesus, this is how Jesus responds, and it's recorded for us in Mark. In Mark, it says, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery. Okay, here's my point. Where's the exception clause in this? It's not there. But you see, it's not in this text, but it's in Matthew 9, except for marital unfaithfulness. So which is it? Is it verse 9 of Matthew 19? Or is it here in Mark chapter 10? See, what I'm saying to you is, I don't think Jesus is purposely sitting down and writing all of the reasons why people are seeking divorce here and what's legitimate and not. Because Jesus is talking to them about what God's ultimate goal was to bring this sense of oneness. Come on, the world is broken. We can fabricate all kinds of lists why people are getting divorced. And some are legitimate, some illegitimate, right? A man walks out on his wife because he wants to have an affair with some younger woman. Yeah, that's illegitimate. And I could say that because why? You made a marriage covenant for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and health, till death do us part. What about that covenant? What about this covenant that Jesus has just finished, describing to us, here in this text? About this marriage covenant now, about leaving, cleaving, being one, about the permanence of marriage. Yeah, all of a sudden, that doesn't count anymore. No, so Jesus isn't here to give you this whole big list. He's there addressing the accusation from the Pharisees that are trying to put him in a bad light. So it's incumbent upon us then to look at these passages in the context of the whole. And in the context of the whole, you see, yeah, Matthew is bringing up this exception. But here's another one. Here's another one. If that's a little confusing between Matthew 19 and Mark chapter 10, one has the exception, one doesn't, then what about this one? In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 15, it's here talking about a marriage. It says, listen, if you're married to an unbeliever and that unbeliever leaves, let him do so. A believing man or woman is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to peace. So wait a minute. This is offering another exception. This unbeliever walks out. There is this level of abandonment. And so now that's another reason. So if we're making our little list, I thought Jesus said this in verse 19. It says that, I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness. Well, is that marital unfaithfulness? Does that take into account 1 Corinthians 7 where they just leave? Is that also included? And does leaving, is that just for physical abandonment, like they just left the house? Or could that be emotional abandonment? That they are no longer fulfilling the covenant of being united or becoming one, or honoring the permanence of this union? See, there's a lot of questions there, right? All of which deals with the brokenness of humanity the way we find it right now. And people are looking for a way to deal with the brokenness that's in our world. Jesus, though, is forcing us to lift our minds up and think about his ideals and then working towards those. Because somewhere, if I don't lose sight of this ideal, then the next time I get into a fight with my wife, I'm not looking for grounds to get rid of her. I'm looking for a way to be reconciled to her. I gotta then walk away and examine my heart and say, hey, was I being a jerk? Am I not thinking correctly? Is this all about me and not about her? Am I not taking her feelings into account? Are there other circumstances that are surrounding this? Do I have to be a little bit more patient? Do I have to walk with her through this road? You see, now I'm not looking for a reason to divorce her for any and every reason. Now I have in my mind this goal that God has for me of becoming one. This is his design. And even in this broken world, Jesus is saying, look, you got to live by these kingdom principles. You have to be praying for his will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. So my friends, I think really what's going on in this text is that both in the exceptions that we find in Jesus and Paul in 1 Corinthians 7, the reason why they're saying these things is because they're destroying the very fundamental components of marriage, which is all about what? Leaving and cleaving or becoming one in unity. Like whatever is getting in the way of that, come on, we can't let that happen. Now, is it going to happen? Like even Jesus said, he says, woe be unto the world, for such things must come. But woe be unto the one through whom they come. So I know we live in a broken world. This is never going to be heaven. But as believers, as those of us who now have our minds fixed on Jesus, we're being asked to walk in a different path. And that's the path that we're being invited to. A path that says, love your enemies. A path that says, forgive 70 times 7. A path that says, hey, if I've shown you grace, I want you to show that same grace to others. As far as it depends on you, I want you to be at peace with all men. Now, all of a sudden, you begin to realize, this Christian life, it means a whole new way of thinking. So, my friends, are you opening up that door? Are you allowing Jesus to speak into your life? Are you allowing him to set your feet in a whole nother direction? Because when you do, you'll seize the day. And you'll recognize that we serve a God who is good all the time. Well, that's plenty for one day. And I want to thank you for joining this morning, on Thursday, March 2nd. I trust that you guys have a great day. And Lord willing, we'll conclude our week tomorrow. So God bless you, my friends. Thanks so much for tuning in.